All right, everyone. Welcome to the District 3 podcast with Councilwoman Shameka Parrish-Wright. And today we are joined by Dr. Fosl. Dr. Fosl, it is now over to you.
Oh, my gosh. Well, thank you for having me. Yes, I'm Cate Fosl. I, for many years, was a professor of women's and gender studies at U of L, and I'm now retired, so I'm emeritus. I also was the founding director of the Braden Institute for Social Justice Research, which is how I got involved with housing issues in Shively. Hey, Shameka.
Thank you. And we have so much to talk about, but we are on a limited time because we have to go see our dearest, our own hidden figures. Don't let me mess that up. Elmer, Lucille,
Allen.
I was going to say she has an extra name like me. Elmer, Lucille, Allen. But I do want to do something fun. I learned from Cate. I'm inspired. Before I got married, I learned about how her and her husband, Peter Fosl, had their names and they combined their names and came up with Fosl.
Yes, we were Foster and Wassel, and it sounded like a chemical company if we hyphenated, as you all did. So instead, my 5-year-old suggested combining the names, and that's what we did, and that's why my name's spelled so funny, just Fosl.
I love that. I tried to get James to come up with something for Parrish-Wright and just tried to do that because I was inspired by the way you did it. I've went through blues for hyphenating my name, but I believe you shouldn't have to lose everything you are to gain anything, and I think that this is important as we move forward as progressive women who are using everything we got to be effective in the community and also tell the stories. And I appreciate historians because living life can be so much and you can get caught up into everything that's going that you don't get the opportunity to really take back and say, where has this played out before? What story is this? The irony of meeting you with the late, great Anne Braden, being connected to you as you were writing her, would you call that? Biography. Yeah. And understanding I had come to know and love this woman, not in a white savior way, but in a way that she was taking action for doing things that she believed some of her people had wrong, right? Fighting, being an abolitionist, fighting against racist practices, and dedicating her life's work to that. Yep. I was so impressed. But then I got to meet you as a result of that, and we took a road trip to Georgia together. And then the more and more you completed your tenure, you did your sabbatical, you've raised your sons, you've done all of these things. And the more and more we accomplish and we put under our belt, the less time we've had an opportunity to spend together. So
it's true.
This is a real treat to have you here. And I know that we're going to talk about housing and in Shively, where my husband came back, we got back together, we separated. I moved back because my father was sick. We got back together and he said, I want to buy a house. I wasn't sure if I wanted to buy a house in Louisville because I wasn't sure if I was going to stay. I felt like there's so many glass ceilings and I was worried that this was the best decision for all of my children. And so I said, you work on that. I'm doing this social justice work and I'm going to work on this. He worked on it and called me one day. And he said, come and see this house. I said, where is it? He gave me the address on Deveron Drive. I drove, and once I got and it said, welcome to Shively, I said, I don't want to curse. Are we allowed to curse?
I mean, it's up to you.
I said, damn it, the irony of coming back and buying our first home in Shively, where what I have come to know over the years through your amazing work, through Anne Braden and Carl Braden's work, was this is such a crucial opportunity to be even more connected to that. And so we were supposed to have Andrew and Charlotte Wade's, I think he would be their grandson. I
think it's their great nephew.
Great nephew.
Yes.
I'm sorry, great nephew, Mr. Ebbs. But we're gonna meet with him at another time. But I am excited to talk about the importance of Shively now that I am the Louisville Metro Councilwoman for District 3 and now a homeowner in Shively. This is so significant for the things that you've learned about Shively. That was a long way to talk about this, but I wanted to show the connections of this. These things happened over time. Never was in my plan, but now that I'm here, I'm honored to serve the city in this way and also to represent Shively and lift up every neighborhood in District 3.
And I have to say, Shameka, I mean, in 2004, in the final year and a half of Ann Braden's life, you know, she and I worked together to get that marker established out there at the head of the street, where the Wades bought.
Right. Was it Roan Street?
It was Roan
names.
Court, and
Roan
then it got
Court.
changed to Clyde Drive.
That's right.
And the marker's at the very head of Clyde Drive, not actually in front of the house itself.
Yeah, I think it caused a lot of issues.
Yes.
Having it there, and I door knocked. So running for this seat, Dre and I door knocked on Clyde, and I was like, "This is the street." And I just stood there and I took a deep breath. I had been there before on history tours, but to be there and to say I'm actually door knocking and lit dropping on this very street. But yeah, I know that because we went through. I was going through Albuquerque, New Mexico. One of my daughters, who turned me on to watching Breaking Bad, was like, "You're there on your way to that resort. Can you stop by the house?" And I said, "No, I bet you those people are tired of that." Sure enough, because that is the famous house where he threw this pizza on top of the roof. And I stopped by there. This was before they put fencing up, and now they have to like really protect it. But it's so cheesy, but it's so memorable, and it really, really is a play to history, whether that is a fiction or nonfiction. When you have a reality, I should tell Ann Braden this. She said, "I assign all these readings in her class, and I tell you all to do all this stuff, and you just want to hear me talk." I said, "Ann Braden, why would we want to just focus on a reading when we have you here?" And that mattered so much. So she hated it. But I love the fact that we had that kind of history there where she can give us that oral communication, and you got to to tell that story. So,
well, what we found when we were door knocking, she and I, about that marker, was that it was such a multiracial neighborhood now, and that's a great irony given what happened in 1954.
That is great, and thank you both. So we are just going to kick off these questions for the good Dr. Fosl. And the first one we have is that our District 3, obviously, includes all of the city of Shively, which is one of the oldest cities in Jefferson County. And at one point, like you alluded to, it was an all-white community. What can you tell us about the demographic shift in Shively, and what was it during the Civil Rights era? Or did it predate that?
Well, it both predated and postdated that. I mean, Shively was barely, it was not the size it is now in 1954 when Ann and Carl Braden bought that house as the fronts for Andrew and Charlotte Wade on what's today Clyde Drive, when the Wades were unable to buy it for themselves. And so Shively, that wasn't even part of Shively at that time. It was like unincorporated Shively. So Shively only really grew after World War II, but it grew as a largely white community, in part because if you drew a line from the center of Louisville out through West Louisville, it's in a straight line going to Shively. So a lot of the whites that fled West Louisville, when blacks began to moved out there to Shively. So they had an attitude, right, probably some of them more aggressively than other whites in the Louisville area.
Do you feel like does it seem like the white flight that happened brought in those attitudes, because a lot of them felt like they were forced to move because the demographics were changing in the West End?
Well, there's at least some of that. Okay. I really don't know about who was in Shively before that started. I don't know that much about the history of Shively before World War II or something, but certainly Shively remained majority white up through like the turn of the 21st century, really. It's really been in the 90s and in the 2000s and since, when Shively became Shively, I believe I'm right, Shameka, don't quote me on this. I shouldn't be saying it on a podcast if I'm not sure. But I'm a historian, right? I'm not a sociologist, but I'm pretty sure that Shively was still actually majority white at the time that Ann and I worked on that marker project in 2004, but it was getting close to being no longer majority white. And so that shift happened pretty late. And why did it happen later in Shively, I think, had to do with that white flight out of West Louisville and the opposition then that people out there had, and opposition to merger. There was a lot of opposition to merger out there. Well, first there was opposition to the Wades, 50s. There was opposition to busing, organized opposition in Shively, white opposition in the 70s, and then opposition to merger in 2000s. Is that what kept Shively white, or was the fact that Shively stayed white connected to those sentiments? I really, what came first, the chicken or the egg? I don't know.
I would love to hear from someone who has a little bit more knowledge of that, but I think what you've depicted is accurate as far as what I've seen, even from our deed on our house. It was built in 1955. It was one owner, and we've seen that a lot along our block. And as we continue to grow and the demographics change, now this whole name, I don't know when it started, but this lively Shively thing has come about. And now we're on our second black woman mayor in Shively. We had Mayor Beverly Chester Burton. Now we have Mayor Maria Johnson. And it's been amazing to see that transition. But I do want to know where the infusion of the distilleries and how that played a part in how Shively was able to maintain its makeup in that way. I think that the jobs and the distilleries and being a separate city, one of the older cities, gave it a level that some of the smaller cities don't see. It is a small city, but it's one that's really prestigious because of the history.
And I think it has more of an identity as a small city than a place like, there's like several of them over near where I live in the Highlands. There's like Strathmore Village. There's like Kingsley. They don't have an identity as a village or as a town. But Shively does have
like
that.
A subdivision almost when you think of those much smaller. I mean, not the Highlands or like St. Matthews, but if you think of like Strathmore or Bonnet, like that's almost a subdivision.
You're right, but there are so many of them in Louisville.
It's like 80 small cities.
And some of them have their own police force. They have their own, various services that sort of duplicate really what Metro Louisville offers.
And Frankfort just passed that new home rule city, which would, I think, make it easier to organize a small city.
It kind of rolls back some of the gains of merger, which we work with a lot of amazing allies that were against merger in the first place on the impact it would have on it's more than 9 neighborhoods, but the 9 main neighborhoods of West Louisville. And people are now talking about that. But the way that the new legislation that you mentioned, Ben, is being used now, it's further out beyond the 64 or the corridor where people are saying we're lost and forgotten. We need to be able to incorporate and be our own entity so that we can get the benefits, basically saying merger failed them, and people are on both sides cautious about it because they're like, do we have the tax base? What's going to happen? Shively again gets over $30 million in benefits from having the distilleries there, and a lot of the other communities, and I think the budget is around $17 million for the city. So a lot of other communities don't have that kind of tax base or revenue from that business, and that is a uniqueness of Shively that we have to factor into. So this was great to know that.
And I'm just going to switch gears to make sure we power through all these questions and respect everybody's time. According to recent data, District 3 is a majority black district in Louisville, and it does have high rates of home ownership, especially among black residents. Can you just talk a little bit about historic redlining and then what measures have been taken historically to increase black homeownership opportunities, specifically in the area?
Well, I don't actually know that much about Shively specifically with redlining, but I think there are a variety of reasons why home ownership has been more available to a wider spectrum of people, both according to race and class in Shively. And some of that has to do with those smaller homes and smaller lots that are more affordable, whereas so much of Jefferson County is zoned R4, and you only can put a really big house on these lots, whereas there were already these houses that were built in the post-war years in Shively and haven't been torn down and gentrified into, more larger lots, larger house sizes. I mean, I'm sure there's some of that there, but it's not like it is out in the Far East End. And I think some of that has to do with, what I speculate and don't really know about is that Shively wasn't redlined because Shively was majority white. And it wasn't part of the old city. So what were those? I mean, you would have to look at Josh Poe's very, very valuable redlining map of Jefferson County to really verify what I'm saying or to dispute it, one or the other, because I really haven't, imagined. I haven't looked at the map with Shively in mind that way, but that's my speculation, is that it wasn't really redlined because it wasn't originally a majority black neighborhood.
So then after the Wades moved in and then subsequently moved out, unfortunately, because it was so difficult. So when did it, do you think it really started to, I know you said in the early aughts, but like after the Wades, was there any forward movement in Shively with block, like did they quote unquote block bust after that, or?
I am not aware of blockbusting in Shively, but I do want to say that even when the Wades bought there in 1954, there were a couple of, maybe more, but there were a few pockets that were majority black then that were not hostile to black newcomers at that time. And the Wades simply did not choose one of them. I mean, that street you referred to, and I've door knocked too, on that street, it wasn't like ... little house, little lot, the way that it was by the time we came along. That was only the second or third house out there. It was a brand new development with a lot of open land at that time, and that appealed to them, whereas these neighborhoods that were more welcoming to black residents were in more developed parts of Shively at that time in 1954.
Well said.
Thank you. And then I know, because you do study civil rights, so what were some of the ways that some more local initiatives and activism have addressed some of this historic discrimination in Louisville?
Well, there's a lot of them, honestly. I mean, Louisville had in the mid-60s, 66, 67, 68, a very, very loud, big, proud, housing desegregation movement that was part of the civil rights movement. It was a big thrust of the civil rights movement here in a way that it wasn't in a lot of other cities. And so we ended up with a fair housing law, and we ended up with, first of all, some block busting, like you talked about earlier in this, like the mid-60s. There was quite a bit of block busting in West Louisville in those some of those 9 neighborhoods of the West End. So that's one thing, a big movement in the late 60s. That didn't stop. In fact, one might argue that it fueled white flight in response, on the part of hostile whites, okay? But there was always a lot of advocacy for fair housing in Louisville. The establishment of the Metro Louisville Human Relations Commission, which still exists today, it was largely to advocate for fair and affordable housing. And that was an arm of government, okay? But then by the late century, I want to say 1989, the Metropolitan Housing Coalition was formed, and specifically with that as its purpose. And their first director, certainly an early director, I want to say she was their founding director, Susie Post, came out of a big activist background with regard to, she was one of the plaintiffs in the suit that desegregated Louisville schools with the busing federal court decision. She had been very active in really mobilizing or re-energizing the ACLU of Kentucky. So they had a real go-getter at the helm of that organization. And then even more recently, you got things like what Josh Poe did. I mean, I think that redlining project has brought a lot of attention to the issue of fair housing. More recently in the 21st century.
Yeah, you mentioned every touch point of Susie Post, Josh Poe, all these amazing people, MHC, ACLU, just thinking about where my touch points of coming in and moving here from another city and being homeless, and even while being homeless, working with MHC to help establish an affordable housing trust fund, and just watching that journey of all these people. Love Susie Post, and she made really good chicken salad. I know it's unrelated, but she made really good chicken salad. That woman could cook. That woman was so talented in so many ways, but her leadership at the helm of some of this amazing work is undeniable and unforgettable, and the ability to work across all these lines of difference. And also one of the people who helped found or helped work on the Kentucky Alliance Against Racism and Political Repression.
Absolutely.
In the beginning, which enters me coming in as an intern and meeting you. So just seeing how that comes full circle to now has brought up this question, something that was historic around our housing fight is now still a housing fight, as legislation has been put forth to roll back some of the gains we've made on source of income and how people are. I always tell people the strongest laws are around land ownership, and that is the makeup of our country. But to see that Kentucky is once again statewide, rural, urban, suburban, from the hood to the holler, housing has risen as one of the most important issues of our state and time. And just to see where we were once pioneers now and I tell Ben this all the time, for all people, not just renters, but people who are looking for pathways to home ownership, I'm worried about what the future holds and how things are being held back. And for the West End, for these amazing 9 neighborhoods, to have more than 60% of the ownership be people who do not live in that West End. And now the argumentative issues around the West End opportunity, the TIFs, and finding out that there's more than 30 TIFs that are operating in Kentucky. But this one is so specific because it's another way where the West End communities can be gutted and left out of the growth that merger promised in the early 2000s.
And
No.
Okay, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Early 2000s.
But given what you said about that, I think our final question, which is more philosophical in nature than anything, is that I know I have seen, I don't know reports, that might be too technical, but I have seen statements that essentially say Louisville is one of the top 3 segregated cities in our country. And so I don't have the data, but I've seen it. So do y'all think there's any truth to that? Like what?
Well, again, I'm a historian, not a sociologist, but I would have to dispute that. I mean, I think, to go back to the earlier question in terms of the advocacy, I mean, one of the things that happened with the Anne Braden Institute when I was the leader of that was we partnered with the Metropolitan Housing Coalition and did an in-depth study of the history of like racial disparities in housing in Louisville. And by the way, you were naming names, Shameka, so I do want to call the name of Carolyn Miller Cooper.
Yes.
Who was a very visionary director of the Metro Louisville.
She helped get me appointed to the Human Relations Commission.
Yes, and she's no longer with us. She died very young she died young.
Thank you for lifting her
But
up.
she was someone who was very concerned with justice in housing and more broadly. But she said, Cate, I want y'all to write this history of institutional racism in housing, and that's what we produced. So we looked at this very question, and we did find out that as of 2014, about half of metropolitan Louisville residents live in what's called extreme segregation. Now, that said, I would have to say I looked into this a little bit just more recently, and, there are so many ways to measure segregation, and you can measure it according to this, dissimilarity index, meaning, what percentage of residents would have to move for the community to achieve racial integration. And so we do have a high number there, but it's not that high relative to a lot of cities. I was just looking earlier at some statistics, and I think most sociologists who study this would agree that Louisville is not third. It's somewhere between 30th and 35th out of the top 50 cities when it comes to housing segregation. Now, wealth segregation
that's a good distinction.
A great point.
Mm-hmm.
Connects with racial segregation, obviously, and we're higher up on the index of wealth segregation. So to the extent that race, class rides on race in the United States and in Louisville, then we do have an extreme problem with segregation. By saying we're not in the top 3 does not mean it's not a very, very serious problem that has to be addressed, okay?
Yeah, for me, quickly, I don't disagree with what I've heard here. On the practical, down to the ground level, from what I've seen in the mobility of people, I do think that there is a distinction with wealth and where people live and how people who gain wealth or gain gainful employment or ability to move their families, they move them towards east. My sister lives with my mother in J-Town, and I live in Shively, but I also see where a lot of my housing has been in the West End neighborhoods and how it's important and intentional that I've been to be there, to spend my money there, to support organizations that's there, because I do believe the West End is the best end. The design of the homes, the tree canopies, the streets named after trees. And so I think there's a lot of value added. And if you're thinking about gentrification, life thrives around water. So you can only go so far west, and then north is you're in the river.
Right.
So it's important that people understand that those communities are so vital, because now, instead of white flight, those who have wealth and they want to work, eat, and play in the same place, and they're coming back downtown, back to these neighborhoods that they once fled. And now, because of the lack of climate change options, sustainability options, and all those things that are outside of the skirts of the city, now people want to be closer to where they can get all their needs met. And this, to me, that displacement is why I was very supportive of Councilman Ja'Cory Arthurs and so many people. Josh Poe was connected to that, who I worked with at the Bell Project. But all of those folks are connected to this anti-displacement ordinance, which is so important, because now Smoketown, all these neighborhoods that are traditionally black neighborhoods or neighborhoods where they had a lot of diversity, they are now targeted, and the prices of the homes and people are being priced out. And so I think that this is still telling the story of housing in Louisville, and I appreciate the historical context.
Well, I really appreciate your mentioning that, because back to his earlier question, I think that in 2024, anti-redlining strategies have got to be anti-displacement strategies.
That's right.
That is the anti-redlining gesture that's vital at this moment in our history. Yes. So thank you.
And we're seeing that come out again and again. And just talking with my teams on my Vocal Kentucky and my teams with being here in council, seeing what I went bankrupt working for the Kentucky Alliance and did not ever see myself owning a home or having the ability. And then watching them and seeing them navigate this and know that, people like Kathy Hinko choose to be renters. We're getting a lot of people who are not understanding the value that renters add to every community.
Absolutely.
And then looking at my teams of generations that are younger than me, who I don't see a path of home ownership in their future right now. And I want that to happen for them. And it starts with better wages, so they match the real estate. The way that real estate is going up and the way that wages have not changed does not promise a promising future. But I think our city is changeable. It's beautiful enough that people want to work together. And this is a place you come back to. We're centrally located.
Right.
Our highways connect you to most of the nation. This is a central place to live. I want to create more opportunities so we don't lose great minds like Ben and Dre who leave because of the lack of ability to own a home or to be able to stay in their lifestyles, to be able to go on vacation, to be able to do the things that we are able to do while we can do them,
And in that sense, you're representing Shively is a really powerful stance to come from with regard to that, that kind of, the American dream of home ownership. I mean, this isn't local, but the headline in the New York Times this morning said that a national poll of renters said that the majority of renters in the United States feel that the American dream of home ownership is dead. That actually, I said that was the Times. It was the Guardian, which is a London newspaper, which you get better
You
news,
do.
honestly. But that is a staggering thing to think about. And like you, I hear this from young people, my kids.
Yeah.
So it's a very important struggle. And I learned this from Ann Braden, and I know you did, Shameka, and you have enacted this motto, but only through struggle can we advance. Struggling together.
That's right. We get there together.
That's right.
Amen. And thank you both so much for your time this evening. It has been great. We've learned a lot. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to District 3 at 574-1103. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.